Greetings all! Today, we are going to take a special look at the fire type and analyze its attributes, the Pokemon assigned to the type, and how it functions from a combative standpoint. The fire type might be one mostly associated with hotheads and environmental conditions that few humans can readily tolerate, but as a result, it is a type that can more than turn up the heat and prove to be unstoppable if it literally can't be put out. The Pokemon assigned to the type may be walking fire hazards to some degree, and can in turn potentially be quite dangerous, but the intensity and the sheer power behind many of their strikes can prove to be incredibly hard to resist, with those assigned to the type further possessing a wider degree of resistances than one might think initially. You might have to get used to extreme heat when working alongside these Pokemon, but it can often more than prove to be worth it, as the sheer energy that Pokemon assigned to the type have can make them great competitors in battle and provide a dazzling show of flames and spectacle that few other types can match in their own way. The fire type, as it is seen in the natural world, is one born out of a combination of defense and adaptation to extremely hot environments that are often too dangerous for other types of Pokemon to readily survive in. In essence, Pokemon that are assigned to this type are distinct from others in that they are able to naturally generate fire and other materials from their body that are of an extremely high temperature, designed initially to ward off potential predators, before later becoming an offensive biological tool in the families of most of the Pokemon assigned to the type. In the majority of cases, the power of this type is derived from a flame sac, or organic combustion chamber, that uses a variety of species-specific chemical fuel sources in order to generate a burst of heat that can then be released from the body as a series of embers or streams of fire, among other forms of projectile attacks. Some are able to use other forms of attack, like organically generated magma, as a stand-in for this flame sac, but as a whole, the use of chemicals to ignite substances both internally and externally is what serves as the primary definer for the type. Moreover, just as the use of superheated materials serves to help define projectile-based fire-type attacks, physical attacks are mostly handled as one might imagine, with the user coating its body in flames generated either internally or externally and striking while still engulfed in said flames, and are in turn offensive and defensive tools that are just as common to see as special attacks within the type. Because of the fairly simple biological nature of the flame sacs and related organic apparatuses that enable the use of fire-type attacks, a wide variety of life forms can be observed as being assigned to the type, though in all honesty, a majority of the species are classified as mammals. It is thought that this is because, in the case of mammals, most of their powers originate from the initial development of a flame sac, the common denominator that unifies most of the Pokemon assigned to this type. Reptiles and birds make up another sizable portion of the populace of the fire type, with the rest generally consisting of oddities that exist as independent groups of organisms on their own. Even so, the vast majority of Pokemon assigned to the type gain access to a fairly wide variety of fire-type moves throughout their lifetime, and can therefore show the dazzling power that the type can possess when wielded by a properly trained beast, and in turn, the fairly universal biological nature of the type's power source and origins. While the nature of the fire type may be one of defensive and environmental circumstances at its base, its presence is surprisingly overpowering to a large extent among the Pokemon assigned to the type, as their move variety can be fairly limited. Though the addition of a secondary type can help add some variety to their moveset, Pokemon assigned to the type generally are restricted to otherwise using basic normal type attacks or using moves of a type that is often associated with fire and extreme heat in general. In particular, the ground, rock, and even poison type in the case of being able to release noxious gases from incomplete combustion. Moreover, special attacks tend to outnumber physical attacks with the type, but this is not to say that physical attacks are rare. Furthermore, the type has access to more high-powered attacks than any other type, granting the Pokemon assigned to the type access to a deadly variety of powerful attacks that can more than prove to be incredibly damaging to anything they come across. What the type generally lacks in move variety, it more than makes up for in brute power, and can easily be used to bulldoze other Pokemon even if a type advantage isn't present. In terms of stat averages, the type shows below average performance in most stats, but this is not entirely surprising, as the fire type is one of specialization with a major focus put on speed and offensive power. As far as its weaknesses go, the type on average possesses low HP, defense, and special defense stats, which makes some sense, as a noticeable portion of the overall stamina of the Pokemon assigned to the type is devoted to generating their fire-type powers. And since most of these Pokemon are mammals, birds, and reptiles, their defenses are not designed to be that imposing or terrific in any regard. This is especially the case with Pokemon that have external flames on their bodies at all times, as the flames are meant to help deter direct attacks in the absence of strong defenses. In terms of strengths, the nature in which fire and heat is generated by these creatures, generally leaving their bodies as part of a projectile attack, and the fact that the heat generated in their bodies tends to either fuel or help put their metabolisms into overdrive, results in their base special attack and speed stats being particularly high and even above average in comparison to all other known types, though the type's average attack stat is actually its second highest stat, which makes sense given the raw offensive power that many fire types can wield. As such, these beasts are best designed for purely offensive combat most of the time, and can definitely put to good use their powerful attacks to keep opponents at bay and scorch them at the same time. Currently, there are 66 recognized types of fire-type Pokemon, 31 of them being pure fire types, and the remaining 35 being dual types. Additionally, 23 of the dual types are primary fire types, while the remaining 12 are secondary fire types. They are broken down into the following categories. Mammals. These Pokemon are unified by the fact that they are mammals, and possess anatomical forms that mostly match up with the basic characteristics that define mammals. In the vast majority of cases, these creatures have developed their intense fire-type powers either as a defensive measure or as a consequence of choosing to live within extremely hot environments that few other life forms can stand, much as the norm dictates. Most of the Pokemon in this group generate fire through internal flame sacs that serve as combustion chambers where chemicals are ignited before being released from their body through some sort of orifice. The flame sacs might be at least partially external in some cases, and in turn douse their possessors in flames, but as a whole, the general anatomy of these creatures lines up quite readily, and they tend to be at least somewhat easy to train compared to other fire-type Pokemon. Reptiles and Reptile-Like. These Pokemon are unified by the fact that they have a bodily form that is primarily reptilian, though they may have other traits such as the draconic forms of the members of the Charmander family. The powers of these creatures tend to involve both internal and external sources of combustion, and while most are able to fuel their powers through their own biological processes, some, like Torkoal, must rely on external fuel sources in order to keep their powers going. Regardless, these creatures tend to shirk the cold-blooded nature normally assigned to reptiles, as their internal body temperatures are incredibly high in most cases, negating the effects of cold temperatures on their bodies for the most part. Birds. These Pokemon are unified by the fact that they are birds, and have developed the ability to use fire through the development of flame sacs in their bodies as both a defensive and an offensive tool to attack more powerful grass and bug-type Pokemon that might otherwise be difficult to take down with more anatomically conventional attacks. While the members of the Torchic family have lost the ability to fly in exchange for more ground-based lifestyle and fighting-type attributes, they are still a force to be reckoned with, attacking fiercely with powerful moves like Sky Uppercut and Blaze Kick. The rest of these creatures tend to have their fire-type powers courtesy of the same type of flame sac seen in most fire types, though their powers might not always come from common fuel sources, as seen in the sacred fire attack utilized by Ho-Oh and the unusual dancing prowess of Oricorio. Spiritual. These entities are unified by the fact that they are classified as ghosts, but are unique for being able to learn naturally and readily utilize fire as a weapon. In the case of Rotom, this power only becomes accessible to them if they possess a specially designed oven. While the change is only temporary, it nonetheless grants these creatures access to the powerful overheat attack and makes them a considerable threat. The members of the Litwick family, on the other hand, are classified as fire types for their natural power to generate spectral fire, a unique form of the phenomenon that uses spiritual energy as its fuel source and can be manipulated through pyrokinesis. This makes them a dire threat in any fight, as spectral fire has the power to burn others without leaving a noticeable mark, making it very difficult to heal any damage their attacks do without knowing what part of one's Pokémon was actually hurt. Thermophilic Bacteria. This special category is reserved for the members of the Slugma family, for though their abnormal forms may seemingly betray this, the members of this family are actually formed from sentient colonies of thermophilic bacteria that are able to thrive in incredibly hot environments, even within flowing magma and lava. They are by no means incredibly intelligent, but they are able to make use of their liquid bodies to scorch anything that dares to get near them, and are incredibly dangerous to come into direct contact with. Thankfully, they are quite slow and thus easy to outrun, but their powerful lava plume attack can still prove to be a threat, especially since they often incorporate pieces of their own molten hot bodies to make the attack more damaging. Insectoids. This special category is reserved for the members of the Larvesta family, the only bug types that are able to naturally and readily wield fire as an offensive tool. Unlike most insectoids, Larvesta and Volcarona possess exoskeletons that are naturally coated in an organic compound that snuffs out oxygen-fueled fire upon contact, granting them a deceptive resistance against the fire-type attacks of other Pokémon, and they can further utilize fire as a weapon themselves. While Larvesta are limited to using an organic oily accelerant to generate fire, Volcarona possess deadly ember scales coated in reactive chemicals that ignite immediately upon coming into contact with oxygen, drowning the area surrounding them in a sea of flames as they flap their wings that can readily scorch anything and everything that dares to confront them in a fight. Artificial. This special category is reserved for cast form while it is in its sunny form. Due to the nature of their molecular structure, cast form have the ability to alter their physical form when in the presence of certain types of weather conditions, manifested in their forecast ability. And in this case, this is the form that they take when there is intense sunlight present in an area. This makes their body fairly gaseous and converts them into pure fire types, in turn enabling them to make great use of the fire-type attacks they gain naturally and deal powerful fire-type damage with their Weather Ball attack. Super-Thermophile. This special category is reserved for Heatran, a Pokémon on the edge of biological existence whose primary combustion method includes merely breathing and being alive. For reasons that are still not well understood, these creatures possess internal body temperatures so high that their internal organs should be vaporized, only being protected from such a fate by an incredibly heat-resistant chemical film, and their metallic body armor is molten in most places, resulting in the near-instant carbonization of almost anything that makes direct contact with them. This extreme state of existence does not seem to bother these legendary beasts, however, and they have learned how to make good use of their absurdly high internal temperatures to produce deadly fire-type attacks, as readily demonstrated in their signature Magma Storm attack. Primal Entity. This special category is reserved for Primal Groudon, a legendary monster that is normally only a pure ground type, but becomes a partial fire type when it undergoes the process of primal reversion. This is primarily because the process effectively superheats the creature's body to the point of partially liquefying its bone and muscle tissue into a slurry that runs along the crevices on its outer hide. This state allows the creature to make more effective use of its lava plume, fire blast, and eruption attacks, and in turn renders it a perfect representation of the earth and the molten material that lies deep below the surface. While it does gain some additional weaknesses while in this form, its biggest weakness to the water type is negated by its signature ability, Desolate Land. Plus, it can readily obliterate water and other ground types with an instantly charged solar beam attack at will, leaving few Pokemon that can readily stand toe-to-toe with it. Legendary Dragon of Truth. This special category is reserved for Reshiram, a legendary creature that originally gained its fiery powers by splitting off from Kyurem many centuries ago, taking a large part of the creature's power in the process. It could be said, from a symbolic stance, that the fire that burns within Reshiram is symbolic of the fiery passion that keeps truth alive and burning throughout the ages as it pushes through the unknown. From a biological stance, though, its powers seem to merely exist with no clear origin, a likely consequence of the creature's unusual birth. Even so, Reshiram is still not to be trifled with, as it can utilize its intense fiery powers in ways that no other fire type can, as demonstrated through its signature Fusion Flare and Blue Flare attacks. Ultra Beast. This special category is reserved for Blacephalon, one of the extra-universal entities known as the Ultra Beasts. These creatures are constructed out of an ethereal substance made from concentrated and solidified spiritual energy that is lightweight and thus allows them to be quite nimble despite their large size. But their fire-type attributes shine through the most with the flammable gases that are emitted from their neck region, which they can ignite to produce fire-type attacks. More importantly, their heads are coated in powdered nitroglycerin designed to explode violently upon forceful contact with another object, feeding into their signature Mind Blown attack, a fire-type move that rivals several others as one of the most powerful of fire-type attacks, in turn making them incredibly dangerous to have to face in any sort of conflict. In looking at the fire-type's advantages and disadvantages in battle, in terms of offense, the fire type has 4 advantages, 4 disadvantages, and no negative immunities. The type is at an advantage against the grass type because the bodies of grass types tend to be more susceptible to extreme temperatures as a result of a lack of total regulation of their internal temperatures and fairly sensitive outer bodies. Because of this, extreme heat can cause them to wilt and be weakened, and fire in particular is able to easily scorch their bodies and leave devastating burns that inflict tremendous damage against them. While some grass types are more resistant against these effects than others, as a whole, it serves as one of the biggest and most noteworthy weaknesses of the type, and one that few grass-type Pokemon are able to partially nullify to any degree. The type is at an advantage against the bug type because the exoskeletons of bug types, though sturdy, tend to burn readily at temperatures in excess of 170 to 180 degrees Fahrenheit. And since most fire-type attacks are delivered at temperatures far in excess of this, it is not that surprising to see that the creatures are weak against said forms of extreme heat, and can thus be readily torched with fire-type attacks. The type is at an advantage against the ice type because, even as solid and frigid as ice can be, its physical state can be returned to a liquid or gaseous state through the application of direct heat, resulting in any Pokemon with a body made out of ice, or with powers that depend on frigid conditions in order to work properly, weak against extreme heat. Even if the target has a body that is normally resilient against heat and can lower the ambient air temperature enough to make the entire area freezing cold, it cannot abate heat for long, thus making any ice type naturally weak against anything that turns the temperature up to an extreme degree, which is often what happens in the execution of fire-type attacks. The type is at an advantage against the steel type because, despite the many resistances that the steel type has against basic physical and energy-based strikes, all metals have a weakness in that they can be reduced to a liquid or worse state if extreme heat is applied to them. Since the attacks learned naturally by many fire-type Pokemon are able to produce temperatures close to and exceeding the melting points of many types of metals, there is an inherent power in these moves to be able to melt and critically damage metal structures, and in turn, any Pokemon that possess large concentrations of metal in their bodies, dealing severe damage to Steel-type Pokemon in the process. The type is at a disadvantage against the Fire-type because, as one might imagine, most fire types are naturally built to be resistant against the effects of extreme heat in order for their bodies to compensate for their own fiery powers, and may even be able to absorb the power of said attacks quite readily, resulting in them naturally possessing a resistance against the damaging effects of fire-type attacks. The type is at a disadvantage against the rock type because the hard and rocky bodies of many of the Pokemon assigned to the type are built to be able to handle extreme heat very well, oftentimes because their bodies are tempered against such extremes, as well as pressure extremes, from living deep below the surface of the planet. While metal might readily melt at high temperatures, at worst, rock will become slightly soft under the same level of heat, but rapid cooling can return the material to a more natural and undamaged state, leaving the target only a little worse for the wear. As such, Pokemon in possession of rocky armor of some sort are able to better withstand the damage from attacks that involve extremely high temperatures, weakening the impact of fire-type attacks as a result. The type is at a disadvantage against the water type because most water-type Pokemon are able to use water to form a thin film around their body that not only keeps them moist, but also serves as a barrier against direct heat, as the impact of a fire-type attack of any form will cause the water to vaporize into steam, causing much of the energy from the attack to dissipate and thus weakening the impact of the fire-type attack used against them. The same effect can be generated by using a water-type attack directly to stop a fire-type move in its tracks, potentially dissipating it completely or otherwise weakening the amount of energy delivered through the attack in the end. Lastly, the type is at a disadvantage against the dragon type because of the dragon type's renowned ability to readily suppress the damage dealt by a number of different natural elemental types as a consequence of the unique elemental properties of draconic energy, with the fire type being one such elemental energy form that they are able to take damage from and be relatively unfazed by in many cases. Defensively speaking, the fire type has 6 resistances, 3 weaknesses, and no immunities. The type is resistant against the grass type because many grass types are highly flammable by nature or are otherwise easily harmed by extreme heat, so out of fear, these creatures are unwilling to use their full power when delivering their primary physical attacks. In the case of energy-based attacks, the extreme heat emitted by fire types helps to dissipate the natural energy, in turn weakening the overall power of the grass-type attack in the process. The type is resistant against the bug type because, since the fire-type attacks used by most Pokemon assigned to the type are able to move beyond the ignition temperature of insectoid exoskeletons and readily burn them, most bug types tend to stay as far away as possible from creatures of the type, and thus are very wary about using their full offensive power against them lest they get burned, resulting in their attacks overall being less powerful and damaging than normal against fire-type Pokemon. The type is resistant against the fire type because, as noted already, most fire types are naturally built to be able to resist the effects of extreme heat in general in order to cope with their own fire-type powers, and are thus able to readily take damage from attacks of the same type without being as hurt by them as most other types would. The type is resistant against the ice type because the fiery powers that creatures assigned to the type possess allow them to keep their overall body temperatures at a much higher level than any other type of life form, and can thus turn the air around them into a seething space where anything can get readily burned or scorched if they stay in their vicinity for too long. Not only does this have the effect of buffering the air temperature against extreme cold and thus dampens the power of freezing attacks, but it also means that even if a fire type is directly hit with an ice type attack, their higher body temperatures will help to keep their core body temperature at a higher level than what might be observed under normal circumstances, in turn lessening the damaging power of ice-type attacks against their physical forms. The type is resistant against the steel type for 2 main reasons. For one thing, since steel types can have the metal components of their bodies completely melted and critically damaged by extreme heat, they are less likely to attack a fire-type opponent at full force, lest they risk having their bodies melted through direct contact. Moreover, even if they are able to strike directly with a steel-type attack, The extreme heat given off by many fire types is enough to partially melt whatever metallic coat is generated around a body part when executing a physical steel type attack, thus removing much of the natural properties of the attack and weakening its overall impact as a result. On the other hand, the heat that many fire types radiate on a constant basis has the ability to scatter and weaken steel type special attacks, since they primarily rely on light energy to deal damage, in turn lessening their overall damaging impact against said fire types. The type is resistant against the fairy type for reasons that are still not entirely clear, but it appears that extreme heat has the power to destabilize and dissipate fairy force energy to a surprising degree, resulting in the weakening of any attack delivered that utilizes fairy force energy as its primary elemental energy source. The type is weak against the rock type because many fire types often have volatile chemicals stored in their body that are used either as the fuel source for or the cause of ignition. In their case, while these chemicals are normally unaffected by psychic type attacks in comparison to the volatiles contained within poison types, due to differing chemical properties and resultant purposes, the severe impact from blunt force attacks delivered by rock type moves, as well as in general the abnormal energy contained in rock type special attacks, can forcefully cause these chemicals to mix when they shouldn't internally or otherwise be ignited prematurely from sudden physical shock, causing severe internal damage and in turn increasing the overall amount of damage the attacks can do against fire types. The type is weak against the ground type for similar reasons as to why it is vulnerable to the rock type, and why both it and the poison type are weak to the ground type. These creatures typically possess volatile chemicals in their bodies that can be ignited with severe physical contact, in turn dealing severe internal damage in the process, and in this case, that includes seismic waves and other ground-based projectiles, hence the fire type's weakness to them. Lastly, the type is weak against the water type because the flames that burn within and around fire-type Pokémon often serve to fuel and accelerate their internal metabolic processes, and thus are vital to their survival. The impact of a water-type attack can potentially dissipate or completely snuff out this source of heat, weakening their target in the process and dealing severe damage with even a weak attack, and in the case of some Pokémon, like the members of the Charmander family, it can prove to be lethal, as the snuffing out of these flames can permanently damage their ability to use fire-type attacks in the future and prove to be potentially life-threatening in the worst of cases. As far as using the fire type in battle goes, it can be said that it is a type with a lot of natural power in it that can definitely be a serious threat in many cases, though this unfortunately extends to all sides of a conflict. For one thing, the type is primarily built for offense and speed, and is not always able to readily play with defensive fighting and tactical strategies, but that works fine in most cases, as they often have the stats needed to back that up. Fire types can generally be easy for almost any trainer to handle when they are young, but this is also because they are still developing their powers. Once they reach their adult form, greater caution must be heeded when using them, as they are strong enough to easily set their entire environment ablaze with even the weakest of fire-type attacks. They tend to be of average intelligence compared to other species, and can thus be worked with on an intellectual level, but they also tend to be a bit hot-headed and easily agitated, requiring evolved Pokémon to be trained carefully in order to keep their temperaments in check. Despite these flaws, many Fire-type Pokémon have a form of useful versatility in the form of the Solar Beam attack, which many Fire types can learn via TM, and a few even naturally, which enables them to target and attack their three biggest weaknesses in the Water, Ground, and Rock types. This, in combination with the sheer agility and raw power many of these creatures display, can make the Fire type incredibly important to have on a team, especially if an opponent is sporting vulnerable Steel types for defense. Trainers that wish to specialize in the type will likely have to invest in some fire-retardant gear when training these creatures to prevent accidents at first, but the need for this will go away eventually, as their obedience and skill in using their Fire-type power increases. The Fire type might only be good for dealing pure offensive beatdowns in most cases, but considering it often has a bit of tactical skill to throw around if needed, and the high damaging power of many attacks assigned to the type, it can more than prove to be a devastating force of destruction in a fight, and can easily exploit and decimate anything, human and Pokemon alike, that is otherwise unprotected against the effects of extremely high temperatures. Thank you all for watching this video. It is always an honor to be able to speak with you all on the subject of Pokemon in a way that brings me great joy and happiness in my work. If you would like to keep tabs on past and future work, click that subscribe button, check out my work on DeviantArt, and don't be shy about following me on Twitter, where you can find pertinent announcements on upcoming work before it is officially posted. Links to both can be found in the video description. If you would like to support my work and help Miguel and I continue to produce more content for you and improve upon our presentation, please visit us at my Patreon page, which you can also find a link to in the video description.
Yep, no.
With that, I thank you for watching and I wish you well.